The oppressive quiet of Sector C hung heavy, a metallic taste on Elias Thorne's tongue. It wasn't the usual hum-mush of distant conversation or the clang of a dropped tray. It was a deeper, more unsettling silence, a prelude. He'd spent 2 decades inside these walls, first as an inmate, now as a guard, and he knew the sound of unease. It vibrated in the air, a low frequency only those attuned to the prison's rhythm could detect. He ran a hand over the stubble on his chin, his gaze sweeping the monitors in the control room. The digital clock in the corner blinked 03:17. Most inmates were in their deepest sleep, their breathing a faint, collective sigh through the thick concrete and steel. But tonight, that sigh was absent. The screens showed static, unmoving forms in their cells. The only flicker of life, the occasional ripple of a blanket. Too still. "Anything on 4B tonight, Jenkins?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble in the hushed room. Jenkins, a fresh-faced guard barely out of training, jumped. He'd been staring intently at a security feed of the cafeteria, long deserted. No, sir. All quiet. Usual nothingness." Jenkins flushed, adjusting the collar of his uniform. Elias grunted. "Nothingness is usually a good thing. Not tonight." He leaned closer to his monitor, focusing on the feed from cell block D. It was here, in the notoriously volatile D block, that the first incidents had occurred. First, 3 inmates in D12, then 2 more in D15. Unexplained collapses, rapid deterioration, and then nothing. The doctors, when they finally got around to it, called it acute systemic failure. Elias called it a cover-up. He zoomed in on cell 34. Marcus Bull Thorne, no relation, was one of the D-block inmates who'd gone down. A mountain of a man, Bull had been known for his iron constitution and an equally iron will. Now he was a ghost, a pallid memory. Elias's eyes narrowed. The official report stated no foul play, no obvious toxins, no infectious agents, just collapse. But the surveillance footage told a different story. Not a definitive one, but enough to prickle Elias's seasoned instincts. He remembered the blurry clip from 2 weeks ago. Bull eating his evening meal, a standard-issue tray of slop. Then, later that night, a sudden violent spasm. The guards had dismissed it as a seizure, but Elias had replayed it a dozen times. The way Bull clutched his stomach, the rapid blanching of his skin. It wasn't a seizure. It was agony. "Sir, something's up with the water pressure in D block," Jenkins murmured, his attention finally diverted from the empty cafeteria. "Fluctuating wildly. The sensor just tripped." Elias felt a jolt. Water. He thought back to the medical reports, the vague mentions of dehydration, despite inmates having constant access to water. He dismissed it then, another symptom of the prison's chronic neglect. Now, it felt like a cold tendril of suspicion wrapping around his gut. "Check the main intake valves for D block," Elias commanded, his voice sharper now. "And get a maintenance crew down there now. I want a full visual inspection." Jenkins fumbled with the comms, his fingers clumsy with a sudden urgency. Elias turned back to the monitors, his gaze sweeping the feeds, searching for anything amiss. He saw a guard, Officer Miller, making his rounds in D block, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Miller was a young guy, earnest but easily distracted. Elias watched him pause outside cell 38, tapping his baton against the bars, a nervous habit. Then he saw it. A faint shimmer, almost imperceptible, emanating from beneath the door of cell 38. It was gone in an instant, a trick of the light, perhaps. But Elias's breath caught. He rewound the feed, frame by frame. Nothing. He played it forward again, slowly. there. A thin, almost invisible wisp, like steam curling out from the crack beneath the door. It dissipated into the stale prison air. He immediately called Miller on his comms. "Miller, report your position. Are you outside cell 38? A crackle. "Yeah, Thorne. Just finishing my rounds here. All quiet." "Did you notice anything unusual?" Elias pressed, his voice tight. "Unusual? Nah, just the usual smell of despair and stale body odor." Miller chuckled nervously. "Get away from that cell, Miller. Now," Elias ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "And don't touch anything. I'm sending a team." Before Miller could respond, a new alert flashed on Elias's screen. Cell 38. A thermal anomaly. A sudden sharp spike in temperature originating from inside the cell. "Jenkins, get the medical team on standby and dispatch an emergency response to D-Block Cell 38. Code Red. Now!" Elias barked, his calm facade shattering. The silence, he realized, wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the deliberate stifling of it, a calculated quiet, allowing something insidious to fester. He watched the monitors, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The feed from Cell 38 remained stubbornly opaque, the inmate's form obscured by the cell's internal structure. But the thermal imaging confirmed it. An unnatural heat source. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He saw Miller, now a safe distance away, looking bewildered. Then 2 guards, their faces grim, approached Cell 38, their weapons drawn. Jenkins was still frantically trying to raise the maintenance crew and the medical team. The comms were buzzing with panicked chatter. The silence had broken. Elias's gaze flickered to the surveillance feed from the prison's main water filtration system. A small, almost imperceptible flicker in the readout. An override. Someone had tampered with the system. Not just the D-Block water, but the entire prison's supply. He slammed his fist on the console. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. This was a deliberate act. A systematic attack. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the quiet had been a deception, a carefully constructed illusion. The storm was no longer gathering, it was breaking, and he was standing right in its eye. The intercom crackled, and a frantic voice yelled, "Thorne, we've got a situation in D-Block. Multiple inmates are down. It's spreading." Elias closed his eyes for a split second, the image of Bull Thorne's contorted face flashing in his mind. He opened them, his jaw set. "Lock down the entire facility and get me access to every single water sample taken from this prison in the last month. Every single one." The hunt, he knew, had just begun, and the prey was already inside. A spreading sickness. The digital hiss of the prison intercom was a familiar soundtrack to Elias's life. But this time, it carried a chilling urgency. All units, code red. Maximum lockdown initiated. Medical teams to the infirmary, immediately. No movement without direct authorization. Repeat, no movement. The voice, usually calm and authoritative, was strained, a tremor betraying the rising panic. Elias, already halfway to the main control room, felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. The silence he'd noticed earlier wasn't peaceful. It was a prelude. He burst into the central command, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Warden Thorne, Elias's father, stood hunched over a bank of monitors, his face etched with grim determination. Maps of the prison flickered across the screens, red dots blooming like a malignant rash in the cell blocks. Each dot represented an inmate, and too many of them were now stationary, lifeless. "We've got 18 confirmed collapses, Elias," his father stated, his voice raspy. "Another dozen reporting acute nausea. dizziness. It's spreading faster than a wildfire through dry kindling. He gestured to a monitor, displaying a schematic of the prison's water pipes. Forensics is analyzing the samples you pulled. Until then, we're operating on the assumption this is a deliberate contamination. Elias's mind raced. Cell 38, he said, the image of the unexplained thermal anomaly flashing in his memory. There was an unusual heat signature there. Could be a localized source or a distraction. His father's eyes narrowed. Get a team, check it out, and for God's sake, be careful. The walk to cell block C felt like a descent into a tomb. The usual cacophony of shouts, clanging metal, and distant music was replaced by an eerie quiet, punctuated only by the hurried footsteps of guards and the occasional retching sound from a distant cell. The air, usually stale, now carried a faint metallic tang. As they approached cell 38, the air grew noticeably warmer, a strange oppressive heat radiating from the steel door. Hold up, Elias ordered his two accompanying guards, Marcus and Lena. Something's not right. He cautiously approached, his hand hovering over the cold steel of his sidearm. The heat emanating from the cell was intense, almost painful. He pressed his ear against the door. A low, rhythmic hum vibrated through the metal. It wasn't human. Marcus, a burly guard with a perpetually skeptical expression, exchanged a glance with Lena, whose face was pale under the harsh lighting. "What do you think, sir?" Marcus whispered, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I think we're about to find out," Elias replied, reaching for his master key. The lock clicked, a loud, jarring sound in the oppressive silence. He nudged the door open with his foot, revealing a scene that made his blood run cold. The cell was empty of an inmate, but far from empty. In the center, a crude, makeshift distillation apparatus shimmered, its coiled copper tubes dripping a viscous pale green liquid into a collection flask. The air was thick with a sickly sweet chemical odor. The heat Elias had detected was from a small, jury-rigged heating element underneath, powered by a series of expertly spliced wires running from the cell's light fixture. "Well, I'll be damned," Lena breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Elias's gaze swept the cell. On a makeshift shelf, carefully arranged, were several small, unmarked vials, each containing a similar greenish fluid. A worn notebook lay open, filled with meticulously scrawled chemical equations and diagrams. This wasn't some random act of vandalism. This was calculated, precise. "This isn't just a contaminated water supply," Elias muttered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the apparatus. "This is a laboratory. Someone has been brewing this poison right under our noses." He felt a surge of cold fury. The quiet, the collapses, the spreading sickness. It was all part of an intricate, horrifying design. He carefully approached the distillation setup, avoiding direct contact with the dripping liquid. The notebook was the key. He picked it up, gloved, and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, a stark contrast to the brutality of its purpose. Names, dates, concentrations, and terrifyingly, a detailed schedule of distribution methods. "Marcus, Lena, secure this cell," Elias commanded, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Don't touch anything until forensics arrives. I need to get this to my father, now." As he hurried back towards command, the intercom crackled again, the warden's voice now laced with undisguised fear. "Elias, report. We've got a second thermal anomaly. Cell block D, cell 57. And the medical staff. They're starting to show symptoms." The carefully constructed calm Elias had maintained shattered. The poison wasn't just targeting inmates, it was targeting everyone. A chilling realization dawned on him. This wasn't just an attack on the prison. It was an attack on the very fabric of their world, designed to cripple and sow chaos, leaving them vulnerable to whatever came next. The spreading sickness wasn't just a physical ailment. It was a creeping dread, infecting every corner of the facility. Lockdown and scrutiny. The emergency lockdown. Klaxon's shriek ripped through the prison's already frayed nerves, a raw, grating sound that vibrated through the very bones of the building. Elias, his hand still resting on the crude workbench in cell 38, felt it deep in his molars. This sound was an old acquaintance, always a harbinger of chaos, never of calm. But today, the unraveling was his to manage. All units, secure your sectors. I repeat, secure your sectors. No unauthorized movement, he barked into his comms. He surveyed the hastily assembled lab, the flasks, the tubing, the faint acrid scent still lingering in the air. All spoke of methodical malice. This wasn't a desperate act, but a calculated campaign. His gaze sharpened on Cale. The prisoner slumped against the wall, a sheen of sweat on his brow, eyes darting with a mix of fear and something Elias couldn't quite place. Guilt? Defiance? Cale. Elias's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You've got answers, and I need them now. Cale flinched, ragged gasps escaping him. I don't know anything, guard. Just felt a bit woozy, same as the others. Elias knelt, his eyes dissecting Cale's face. He knew the tells, the subtle drift in gaze, the micro-twitch in a jawline. This wasn't merely a prisoner feigning ignorance. This was a man shielding something, or someone. Woozy? Your cell is a chemical factory, Cale, and I don't think you're the lead chemist. Before Cale could formulate a response, a frantic voice crackled over Elias's comms. Guard Elias, this is medical. Dr. Eris is down, exhibiting symptoms. We need assistance, multiple staff affected. Elias's blood ran cold. Eris, the doctor treating the initial cases, who had frequented the affected wing. The second thermal anomaly, a subtle energy signature, now clicked into horrific focus. Not another lab, but a silent delivery system. The illness wasn't contained. It was spreading with terrifying efficiency through the very people tasked with stopping it. He rose, his mind a whirlwind. This wasn't just about a few sick inmates anymore. This was the entire facility, collapsing from within. With a swift, practiced movement, he cuffed Cale to the pipework. Stay put. Don't even think about it. Leaving cell 38, Elias found the corridor unnervingly quiet. The prison's usual low hum replaced by a tense, suffocating silence, punctuated only by the distant wail of the klaxon. He sprinted towards the medical wing, his boots echoing on the polished concrete. His own team, the few guards still on their feet, looked grim, their faces pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Status report! Elias barked at Guard Jenkins, who was struggling to assist a staggering nurse. It's bad, Elias, Jenkins stammered, eyes wide with terror. Half the medical staff are exhibiting symptoms. Respiratory distress, disorientation. It's spreading fast. We're losing control. Dr. Aris lay on a gurney, her face ashen, her breathing a shallow, raspy thread. Elias leaned in close. Doctor, can you hear me? Did you notice anything unusual? Any new patients? Any strange deliveries? Eris's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. The air in the vents, a subtle scent like almonds, but fainter. Her voice trailed off, her eyes drifting shut once more. Almonds, a common association with cyanide, but Eris had said fainter. A variant, or something entirely novel. This was far beyond his training. He needed a specialist, and fast. Jenkins, secure the medical wing. No one in, no one out, unless cleared by me. And get me a direct line to Warden Thorne. This is no longer just a prison incident. This is an act of biological warfare. The full weight of the situation bore down on Elias, a crushing burden. He had always seen himself as a cog in the machine, a guardian of order. Now, he faced an invisible enemy, systematically dismantling his world. The initial ambition that had driven him, the desire to prove himself, felt childish and trivial in the face of this unfolding catastrophe. He had to think beyond his own survival, beyond the prison walls. He had to stop this. Not just for the inmates or the staff, but for everyone who might be next. The lockdown was merely the overture. The scrutiny, the desperate hunt for answers, was now a race against the clock. He took in the chaos around him, the fear etched on every face and a cold resolve solidified in his gut. This facility would not fall, not on his watch. The ticking clock, the cloying, almond-sweet air, now a malevolent presence, suffocated the command center. Elias's voice, a raw but steady command, sliced through the rising panic. Lock down Sector Gamma. Isolate the ventilation. Seal all access points. The heavy security doors slammed shut, each reverberating thud a hammer blow against the frantic pulse thrumming in his temples. His radio crackled. Guard Anya, sir. Sector Alpha has 2 more down. Same symptoms. Rapid onset. Anya. He pictured her young, earnest face, usually bright, now undoubtedly etched with fear. He wrestled his focus back to the immediate crisis. Medical response teams, Alpha. Any general population contact? Negative, sir. Cell blocks secured. But the air, it feels thick. Elias grimaced. He recognized the insidious effectiveness of the contagion. He turned to Dr. Eris, already hunched over a microscope, her brow deeply furrowed, her once pristine lab coat smudged with an unidentifiable dark stain. Any progress, Doctor? Eris didn't look up. The samples are peculiar, Elias. Cellular degradation is exceptionally swift, and that scent isn't merely airborne. It's intrinsically linked to the cellular structure. A cyanide derivative, I suspect. Highly volatile. Aerosolized. She nudged a Petri dish across the counter, revealing a faintly pulsing, viscous, dark fluid. Found this in cell 38, along with this. Beside the dish, she placed a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no larger than her thumb, its eyes tiny obsidian chips. Elias picked it up. It felt strangely warm. Kyle's handiwork, then. He knew the prisoner's unusual talent for carving. A macabre message, perhaps. It's more than Kale, Elias. Eris finally met his gaze, her usually sharp, analytical eyes betraying a flicker of desperation. The incubation period is accelerating. What took an hour yesterday now takes minutes, and the transmission, it's airborne. This isn't simple poisoning. It's an engineered plague. A chill, unrelated to the circulating air, permeated Elias's very bones. Engineered plague. The words hung heavy and terrifying in the sterile quiet. He glanced at the monitor displaying the prison's layout. Green dots, representing healthy inmates and staff, began to flick yellow, then red. The spread was exponential. We need an antidote, Eris. Immediately. I'm trying, Elias, but this strain is remarkably resilient. I need more time, more equipment. The biocontainment lab in the infirmary is compromised. We have to relocate. Just then, a guard stumbled into the makeshift command center, clutching his throat, his face a ghastly purple. Sir, the ventilation, it's everywhere. He collapsed, gurgling, the almond scent intensifying around him. Elias rushed forward, but it was futile. The guard's eyes glazed over, his body convulsing once before settling into stillness. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the frantic beeping of Eris's machines. "We've run out of time." Elias's voice was flat. He looked from Aris to the fallen guard. His mind raced, cycling through options, discarding each as quickly as it arose. The prison's emergency protocols were designed for riots, for fires, for escape attempts. Not for this. Not for an enemy that rode on the very air they breathed. He lifted his radio. "All available personnel, listen up. This is Warden Elias Thorne. We have an airborne biological agent. I repeat, airborne. Immediate lockdown is in effect. Anyone experiencing respiratory distress or sudden nausea is to report to a designated isolation cell immediately. Do not, under any circumstances, remove your respirators. Medical staff, prioritize antidote development. Security personnel, your primary objective is containment. Isolate all infected individuals. Prevent further spread. We will not allow this facility to become a tomb." His gaze fell once more on the wooden bird, Kyle. The prisoner's quiet, observant nature had always disquieted Elias. Now, he understood why. This wasn't merely Kel's revenge. This was a meticulously calculated strike, designed to paralyze, to destroy. And Elias, the man who had always prided himself on control, was now battling a phantom. The relentless tick of a silent clock echoed in his ears, a stark reminder of the lives hanging precariously in the balance. A fleeting glimpse. The sickeningly sweet tang of almonds permeated the sterile air, clinging even to the makeshift isolation ward. Through reinforced glass, Elias watched Jax, a once hulking inmate, convulse on his cot. The man's skin, previously a canvas of crude tattoos, now bloomed with angry crimson blotches, capillaries beneath his eyes spiderwebbing like fractured threads. A nurse, her face a stark mask of resolve behind her respirator, adjusted an IV drip with economic, precise movements. This was more than an illness. It was a siege. "Any change, Dr. Eris?" Elias's voice, muffled by his own mask, carried the faint metallic taste of disinfectant. Aris, her brow etched in concentration, didn't glance up from the tablet, clutched in her gloved hands. "Cellular degradation is accelerating. The virus, it's evolving. Or perhaps its aggressive stages were pre-programmed." She swiped through a series of graphs, each line rocketing upward like a frantic seismograph. The initial symptoms were a diversion. This rapid necrosis. It's designed to utterly overwhelm, not merely weaken, the body's defenses. A chill, colder than the ward's climate control, snaked down Elias's spine. "Designed? You're certain it's artificial?" Aris finally met his gaze, her eyes weary yet piercing. "Elias, the pathogen's surgical precision. Its targeted assault on specific cellular structures. It's a bioweapon. Highly refined." She tapped the screen, highlighting a complex molecular sequence. "This isn't naturally occurring." The implications were staggering. No accident, no rogue mutation. This was an act of war, unfolding within his own walls. The wooden bird Kale had clutched, the one that had tumbled from his hand when he collapsed. It now felt less like a clue, and more like a cruel jibe. He recalled a faint, almost imperceptible almond scent from Kale's cell, a smell he dismissed as cleaning solution at the time. How many other signs had he overlooked? "I need to speak with Kale again," Elias stated, his tone flat. Eris shook her head. "He's barely conscious. Critical. Even if he could speak, he might not recall anything useful." "Then I need to find something that can," Elias retorted, spinning on his heel. He ignored the protesting ache in his shoulders, the ceaseless hum of the ventilation system, a constant reminder of the invisible enemy. His mind churned with horrifying possibilities. He thought of the other inmates Cale had interacted with, those exhibiting similar, though milder, symptoms. A pattern was emerging, a thread he hadn't yet fully unraveled. Back in the command center, the air hung thick with stale coffee and palpable desperation. Screens flickered with surveillance footage, each pixel a potential piece of the puzzle. Officer Jenkins, his face gaunt, pointed to a segment. "Sir, look at this. About 3 weeks ago, Kyle's cell block." The grainy video showed Cale, outwardly calm, handing a small wrapped package to another inmate, Silas, during yard time. Silas, notoriously taciturn, pocketed the item without a word. The exchange was brief, almost imperceptible, yet the tension in the room coiled tight. "What was in the package?" Elias leaned closer to the screen. Jenkins rewound the footage. "Can't tell, sir. Too small." But Silas was among the first to show symptoms, nearly a week before Cale. Elias's mind raced. Silas, Cale, the almond scent, a faint but undeniable trail. He remembered Silas's withdrawn demeanor, his almost obsessive solitude. He'd once seen Silas sketching in his cell, intricate designs that had seemed innocuous then. "Get me everything on Silas," Elias commanded, his voice sharp with renewed purpose. "Every interview, visitor log, piece of mail, and search his cell. Tear it apart if necessary. Find anything out of place." He left Jenkins to his task and headed directly for Silas's cell. The door hissed open, revealing a stark space unsettlingly pristine. Guards had already scoured it, but Elias needed to see for himself. The cot was immaculately made, a single book occupying the small metal shelf. Elias picked it up, a well-worn volume of ancient mythology. Beneath it, almost hidden, lay a small, crudely carved wooden bird, an exact twin to Cale's. A jolt coursed through him. Not a taunt, a signature, a macabre calling card. The faint scent of sweet almonds, barely perceptible, clung to the wood. Elias turned the bird over, his thumb tracing its rough edges. A minuscule compartment, so cleverly concealed he nearly missed it, yielded to his fingernail. Inside, nestled on a bed of lint, was a microscopic vial, no larger than a rice grain. It contained a viscous amber liquid, shimmering faintly in the dim light. A cold dread settled deep in Elias's stomach. This wasn't merely a biological weapon. It was an intricately engineered delivery system, designed for stealth and precision. This wasn't just about killing inmates, it was about delivering a message. And Elias, holding that tiny vial, felt he was finally beginning to decipher its chilling language. He finally held a tangible piece of the puzzle, a fleeting glimpse into the orchestrator's mind. The whisper's secret forced confession. The interrogation room, a stark cavity of peeling paint and flickering fluorescence, reeked of metallic dread. Elias watched Cale, whose eyes, once sharp with defiance, now held the dull, distant sheen of dying embers. Dr. Eris stood by the one-way mirror, arms tightly crossed, a grim line etched between her brows. "We know, Cale." Elias's voice, a low, steady current, cut through the suffocating silence. "The lab, the samples. We know you're behind this." He slid a stack of photographs across the table. Blurry Petri dishes, a makeshift centrifuge, a crudely labeled vial. Kyle's gaze flickered, a subtle clenching in his jaw the only outward sign. "You're mistaken, guard," Cal rasped, his voice rough as if seldom used. "I'm a prisoner, not a scientist." "You're a former biochemist, Kyle. We checked. And those are your prints all over the equipment in C5, the abandoned laundry room. Quite an ingenious setup, really. Almost worked. Elias leaned in, his elbows on the table, his gaze unyielding. Almost. Eris stepped forward, her voice sharp, a sonic incision in the tense air. People are dying, Kyle. Guards, inmates, even your own. This isn't a theoretical exercise anymore. It's a slaughter. She thrust a magnified image of the pathogen under Kyle's nose. This strain, it's been modified, engineered for rapid airborne transmission, for extreme lethality. You designed it. Kyle flinched, a fleeting flicker of something. Pride, perhaps, or a dark satisfaction, crossing his features before a familiar sneer reclaimed them. What makes you so certain I'm your monster? Because, Elias's voice dropped to a near whisper, we found the antidote, or rather the precursor, hidden in your cell, a specific enzyme that binds to this particular viral protein. Too precise to be happenstance, Kale. You crafted the lock, and you fashioned the key. A shiver ran through Kale. His eyes darted from Elias's unwavering stare to Aris's furious gaze, then back to the damning evidence spread before him. The facade began to crumble. It wasn't meant to escalate, he murmured, almost to himself. Just the demonstration. A demonstration of what? Eris demanded, her voice laced with incredulity. Your intellectual superiority? Your utter disregard for human life? Kyle finally met Elias's eyes, a desperate, cornered animal's plea in their depths. They were transferring me to a supermax, where the work couldn't continue. I had to show them what they were forfeiting. He gestured vaguely. A deterrent, a bargaining chip. A cold dread settled in Elias's gut. The man was unhinged. And the deaths, Kale? Were those part of the demonstration too? Kale's eyes glazed over. Collateral damage. Unfortunate, yes, but necessary. They would have listened eventually. Once enough, people grasped the magnitude of my contributions. Eris slammed her hand on the table, the sharp report echoing in the small chamber. Magnitude? You unleashed a plague. You gambled with thousands of lives, all for your twisted ego. The antidote, Elias interjected, his words slicing through Eris's fury. Where's the complete formula? How do we synthesize it on a mass scale? Kyle hesitated, a new calculation flickering in his eyes. Information has a price, guard. The price is your life, Kale, Elias stated, his voice flat, stripped of emotion. Cooperate, and we might mitigate some of the devastation. Refuse, and you'll spend your wretched existence knowing you condemned everyone in this facility to a slow, agonizing death, starting with yourself. The air thickened with Kale's internal struggle. He glanced at the door, then back at Elias. The sheer weight of his impending doom, the colossal scale of his atrocity, seemed to finally crush him. His shoulders slumped. There are specific reagents, Kale began, his voice barely audible. Difficult to acquire in a prison, but not impossible if you know how to improvise. I used a modified yeast culture as a vector. The enzyme needs to be bound to a specific protein scaffold for stability in the bloodstream. I can give you the exact sequence. It's in my notes, hidden within a false bottom in my bunk. He looked up, his eyes wide, pleading. But you have to promise me. Promise me the research will continue, that my work won't be lost. Elias exchanged a brief, grim look with Eris. The man was still negotiating, even now. Your work will be thoroughly documented, Kyle, and it will be used to save lives. He omitted the consequences. Kyle nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over him. He began to speak, detailing the complex chemical reactions, The precise measurements, the intricate steps to create the life-saving compound. Elias scribbled furiously, striving to keep pace with the torrent of information, the desperate hope for a cure now within reach. The sterile box of the interrogation room, once a chamber of accusations, had transformed into an unlikely crucible of salvation. The professor's revenge. The infirmary air hung thick with antiseptic and the sour tang of old sweat, a stark contrast to the sterile, almost metallic scent Cale had described in his lab. Elias observed Aris, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration as she methodically prepared Petri dishes. A heavy silence pressed in, punctuated only by the rhythmic purr of the air purifier and the unsettling, distant coughs echoing from the quarantined cell block. He described it as cellular degradation, a rapid breakdown of tissue, Eris murmured, her voice strained, as she drew a precise measure of pale yellow solution into a pipette. The antidote is supposed to halt that process, then initiate cellular repair. She glanced at Elias, shadows deepening the exhaustion beneath her eyes. It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? For something that's caused so much devastation. Elias nodded, Kyle's chilling confession still a leaden weight in his gut. Simple or not, it was their sole recourse. He was very specific about the incubation period for the antidote's full effect. 48 hours. Said it needed time to re-educate the cells. The phrase itself was a cold shiver down his spine. Cale's casual cruelty, his scientific detachment, felt a far more insidious weapon than any blade. They worked in a strained, synchronized rhythm. Eris inoculated the first sample, a tiny drop of the serum introduced to a petri dish teeming with virulent culture. Elias, despite his scientific illiteracy, found himself white-knuckling the lab bench, his gaze transfixed on the murky solution. A primal urge to witness change, to see proof that Cale wasn't merely toying with them, seized him. He called it the professor's revenge, Elias stated, the words bitter on his tongue. Claimed it was for those who underestimated him, who tried to silence his work. Aris scoffed softly, a humorless sound. A revenge that nearly decimated an entire prison population. Some professor. She adjusted her microscope, her face bathed in its cool glow. He's brilliant, undeniably. But brilliance untethered from conscience is simply a weapon. A sudden, sharp ping from the microscope's interface made them both flinch. Aris leaned closer, holding her breath. Elias watched her face, searching for any flicker of hope or despair. A moment stretched, taut with anticipation. Then a slow smile bloomed across her lips, tentative at first, then expanding into genuine relief. "Elias?" she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Look." He peered into the eyepiece. The chaotic, frenzied movement of the degrading cells had visibly slowed. Some appeared to be stabilizing. He couldn't discern the intricate details Eris could, but the transformation was unmistakable. It was like watching a tempest abruptly dissipate, leaving a fragile calm in its wake. "It's working," Eris whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It's actually working." A wave of overwhelming relief washed over Elias, a sudden release of tension he hadn't realized had coiled so tightly within him. It wasn't a cure yet, not for the living, but it was validation. Proof that Cale hadn't outright lied, that a path out of this nightmare truly existed. The subsequent hours blurred into a frenzy of activity. Eris immediately began scaling up antidote production, guided by Cale's meticulous notes. Elias coordinated with Warden Thorne, a grim-faced man who, upon viewing the microscopic evidence, authorized every available resource. The prison's small pharmacy was rapidly converted into a makeshift lab. Extra security details were posted, and a skeleton crew of unaffected guards and orderlies was tasked with preparing for mass administration. Silas, the other piece of Cale's twisted puzzle, remained a lurking shadow. Elias knew he couldn't forget the man who had facilitated this entire disaster, who had helped Cale weaponize his intellect. But for now, survival was the singular imperative. As dawn approached, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, the first batch of antidote was ready. It was a meager quantity, barely enough for a handful of the most critical cases. Elias watched as Aris, her hands remarkably steady despite her profound exhaustion, injected the pale yellow fluid into the IV lines of 3 unconscious inmates. Their breathing was shallow, their skin a mottled gray, their bodies ravaged by Cale's insidious creation. "Now we wait," Eris said, her voice hoarse. 48 hours. The longest 48 hours of our lives. Elias stood beside her, gazing at the ravaged faces of the men. Cale's demonstration had come at an horrific cost. Even if the antidote saved them, the scars, both physical and psychological, would endure. The professor's revenge, indeed, and the reckoning, Elias knew, was still to come. The trap is sprung. The digital clock on the infirmary wall glowed an unforgiving in 0317. Elias felt every second of the 48-hour wait stretching into an eternity. He stood by the first patient, a hulking man named Jax, whose tremors had subsided, but whose breath still rattled like dry leaves. Elias had seen enough death to recognize the fragile edge Jax teetered on. Eris, a phantom of perpetual motion, checked monitors, adjusted IV drips, her face a mask of strained concentration. The air hummed with the quiet desperation of a battlefield hospital, every rustle of fabric, every soft beep of machinery magnified. "His fever's down," Eris murmured, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. She touched Jax's forehead, then pulled her hand back, flexing her fingers. "Still too high, but it's a change." Change. It was all they had to cling to. Elias looked around the packed infirmary. Rows of beds, each occupied by a man whose life hung by a thread, each thread tied to the thin, clear fluid flowing into their veins. The mass production of the antidote had been a blur of frantic activity. Cale's precise instructions barked through the comms, Eris's team working with a speed born of terror. Elias had overseen the distribution, the needle-thin vials now a symbol of both hope and a terrifying gamble. He remembered Cale's cold, analytical tone when he described the bioweapon as a demonstration. Elias clenched his jaw. This wasn't a demonstration. It was an act of biological warfare waged within the confines of a prison. And Cale, for all his genius, was a monster. A sudden piercing cough ripped through the quiet, followed by a choked gasp. Elias spun around. On the far side of the room, another patient, a younger man named Marcus, was struggling, his body convulsing. Eris was already there, pushing through the meager space between beds. "He's crashing," Eris yelled, her voice sharp with alarm. "Get the crash cart!" Elias sprinted, his boots thudding against the linoleum. The scene unfolded in a sickening rush. Marcus's eyes rolled back, his skin taking on a ghastly blue tint. Eris barked orders, her hands flying over his chest, initiating CPR. "Administer another dose of the antitoxin. Full strength," she commanded a nearby medic. Elias grabbed the defibrillator paddles, his heart hammering against his ribs. The acrid smell of antiseptic and fear mingled in the air. He pressed the paddles to Marcus's chest, a jolt of electricity coursing through the man's body, making him arch violently. Nothing. Another shock. Still nothing. The flat line pierced the air, a chilling final note. Aris leaned back, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. Time of death. 03:28. She looked at Elias, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. It's not working for everyone, or it's too late for some. The defeat hit Elias like a physical blow. One down. How many more? The weight of Kale's bargain pressed down on him, a moral anchor dragging him into an ethical abyss. He had promised Kale the preservation of his research, the very work that had produced this cellular horror, in exchange for a chance at saving lives. It felt like shaking hands with the devil. The comms unit on his belt buzzed. Elias pulled it out, his hand shaking slightly. It was Warden Silas. Thorn, status report. My sources indicate a significant deterioration in the infirmary. What's going on? Silas's voice was calm, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. Elias glanced at Eris, then at the lifeless form of Marcus. Warden, we've lost another. The antidote, it's not universally effective, or we're administering it too late for some of the critical cases. A beat of silence. Understood. Keep me informed. And Thorn, Silas added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Don't let anyone else know about this. Negotiation. Not yet. We can't afford panic. Elias knew what Silas meant. The revelation that the cure came from the architect of their suffering, and that his research would be protected, would ignite a riot. He was trapped, caught between Kale's monstrous intellect and Silas's pragmatic ruthlessness. He stared at the comm unit, the weight of the lie settling heavy in his gut. He was complicit now, protecting the secret of a man who had unleashed a plague. The trap was sprung, and he was squarely in its jaws. He looked at Jax, still breathing, still fighting. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered in the darkness. But the cost of that hope, he knew, was far greater than he could have ever imagined. Healing Blackwood. The infirmary, no longer a sterile white expanse, thrummed with a stark energy. Elias watched Eris, her brow etched with focus, meticulously administer the antidote. The precise drip of clear fluid into a prisoner's IV bag punctuated the weighty silence, a stark contrast to the ragged breaths and sporadic coughs that had haunted the air mere hours before. Jackson, the burly prisoner teetering on the edge, now showed a faint return of color to his ashen face. He's stabilizing, Eris murmured, her voice frayed with exhaustion and relief. She met Elias's gaze, her eyes shadowed in a pale face. You did it. Elias registered a hollow triumph. He had secured the antidote, yes, but at what cost? The image of Kale, cool and calculating, bartering lives for his perverse research, gnawed at him, and the warden's chilling word, negotiation. It tasted like bitter ash. He nodded, raking a hand over his stubbled jaw. For now, the true fight is far from over. The ensuing days blurred into a grueling rhythm of treatment, vigilance, and fragile hope. The antidote, a viscous, clear elixir, was systematically dispensed, first to the critically ill, then to the wider population. Elias moved through the cell blocks like a wraith, supervising the process, his senses sharpened, his guard perpetually raised. A palpable tension, a low thrum beneath Blackwood's enforced order, pervaded the atmosphere. Prisoners recovered. Feverish sweats receded, cellular decay seemingly halted. Yet a ghost of fear lingered in their eyes. They had brushed death, and they knew an inexplicable force had been at play. Whispers of Kale's involvement, of his condition, swept through the guards like wildfire. Not the full truth, of course. Silas, with characteristic ruthlessness, had crafted a partial narrative, a radical new treatment forged by an eccentric but brilliant inmate, had saved them. This version cast Cale as a reluctant savior, a genius coerced into aiding the prison rather than the architect of their terror. Elias, privy to the grim reality of their pact, felt the burden of the lie pressed down on him. He found solace in Eris during their brief respites, drawn to her unvarnished honesty. She never questioned his actions, never probed the specifics of the antidote's genesis. She simply administered it, her focus unwavering on her patients. But her silence spoke volumes. One evening, as the infirmary finally quieted, her gaze pierced him. "This isn't truly over, is it?" Elias leaned against a sterile counter, the scent of antiseptic clinging to his uniform. "No, Eris, it's not." He offered no elaboration, and she sought none. Both understood that averting an immediate catastrophe did not extinguish the underlying menace. A week later, Silas summoned him. Elias found the warden amidst a meticulous array of reports on his polished mahogany desk. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and Silas's signature, expensive cologne. "Thorn," Silas began without glancing up, "the recovery rate is impressive, remarkable even." He finally met Elias's gaze, a glint in his eye that Elias couldn't quite decipher. "The prisoner Cale has upheld his end of the bargain." Elias felt a prickle of disquiet. "Yes, Warden. Most of the men are out of critical condition. Some are even resuming light duties." Silas steepled his fingers. "Good. Now, we must ensure his research is adequately protected." He gestured to a series of detailed blueprints unfurled across the desk. "I've arranged for a secure, isolated laboratory to be constructed, far from the general population, naturally. We can't have any unforeseen complications." Elias stared at the blueprints. They depicted a cutting-edge facility, complete with advanced ventilation and multiple layers of security, far more sophisticated than anything the prison currently possessed. Silas was building Cale a sanctuary, a shrine to his bioweaponry. A cold knot tightened in Elias's stomach. "And the security for this lab?" "That, Thorn, will be your responsibility," Silas said, his voice smooth as silk. "You will oversee the construction, the implementation of security protocols, and ultimately, the daily operations." Elias's jaw clenched. He was being tasked with guarding the Devil's Workshop, the very place where the next catastrophe could be born. "Warden, with all due respect, my expertise lies in general security, not biological containment." Silas waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. Your expertise is in ensuring the safety and order of this facility. This new assignment is simply an extension of that. Besides, Cale has specified that he requires a familiar face, someone he trusts." A faint, chilling smile touched Silas's lips. "He considers you a man of your word, Thorn." The words were a calculated barb, a sharp reminder of the desperate compromise Elias had made. He was snared, bound by the very bargain he had brokered. He envisioned Cale, isolated in his new laboratory, free to pursue his research, his twisted genius unleashed within Blackwood's walls. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. The physical wounds of Blackwood were mending, but the rot beneath the surface, the ethical compromise, was only just beginning to fester. "Very well, Warden," Elias said, his voice flat. He picked up one of the blueprints, its sterile lines and diagrams mocking his sense of order. "I'll get started." As he left Silas's office, the weight of his new responsibility bore down on him. He was no longer merely a guard. He was a keeper of secrets, a facilitator of dangerous knowledge, and the reluctant guardian of a monster. Blackwood's healing was a fragile truce, bought at a price Elias wasn't sure he was prepared to pay. The true battle, he realized, had only just begun.